Hi, my name is Patience Swaim, and this is my Tarleton teacher work sample for the class EDUC 4335. I was lucky enough to be placed at Granbury ISD, which is a school district in Granbury, Texas. I was placed at Acton Elementary School in a second grade classroom with Miss Leanne Walker, who is an ELA and social studies teacher. Granbury ISD's vision statement is that all students are equipped with skills to be inspired, contributing citizens, excelling in any chosen endeavor within a dynamic global society. And Acton Elementary's mission statement is that Acton Elementary, in partnership with the community, has high expectations and is committed to reaching hearts, building character, growing learners, and embracing families. This year, Acton's school motto was Our Happy Place. These are the contextual factors for both Granbury ISD and Acton Elementary. The thing that stands out to me most here on this graphic is the economically disadvantaged students. Out of 7,346 in the district, total students in the district, 3,915 are economically disadvantaged. And I know that that is about half of the students. And at Acton Elementary, there's 855 total students, with 397 of them being economically disadvantaged. I think that this can definitely have a huge impact on students' learning, and it's such an important factor to include in decision making and in planning, because if students are coming to school hungry or not properly taken care of at home, they're not going to succeed in school. So we have to pay close attention and focus on those children and teach them to our best abilities and help them where we can. These are the contextual factors for my classroom. I had 16 total students, and 8 were boys and 8 were girls. We had 1 GT student and 5 students that receive RTI services. The students range in ages 7 and 8. And 4 of our students are considered above level, 5 are on level, and 7 of our students are below level. The ethnicity of our students is we have 3 Hispanic students in the class, 2 African American students, and 11 white students. Our students are a fun bunch, and they have so many interests, and these are just to name a few. They love animals, video games, reading, athletics, and arts and crafts. Thankfully, Miss Walker's classroom was equipped with efficient technology. She had Chrome boxes in her classroom, as well as Chromebooks and a smartboard and a doc cam. On this slide, you will see my TEKS, ELPS, CCRS, and technology standards. You may want to pause to read them. This is my unit learning goal and my objectives. My learning goal is that the students will learn what verbs are and how to correctly use them in sentences depending on tense. They will also be able to identify them in sentences they read. Objective 1 is the students will be able to identify and use correct verb tense in sentences using model words in sentences. And Objective 2 is that the students will be able to identify verbs using model words in sentences. This was my assessment plan for my first objective. I had a pre-assessment, which was an 8-question multiple choice quiz about verbs, and I had 2 formative assessments, which were exit tickets. While they were both formative assessments, they had different prompts that the students responded to. And I also had a post-assessment, which is the same thing as my pre-assessment. For Objective 2, I again had my pre-assessment, and I had another formative assessment, which was a verbal review of questions over verbs, and I had the post-assessment once again. This is an overview of what I did for the week of my work sample. I conducted it Tuesday through Monday from September 22nd through 28th. On day 1, I introduced the concept of verbs to the students. On day 2, I taught them about past tense verbs. Day 3 was present tense verbs, day 4 was future tense verbs, and day 5 we covered both objectives and reviewed all of the verb tenses as well as verbs in general. You may want to pause here, and on the next few slides to read in depth. This is my design for instruction, which is just a more in-depth look at my unit summary, what I did the whole week of my work sample. So you may want to pause here and on the next few slides to read. This is the graph that shows my whole class average for the pre-assessment versus the post-assessment. So on the pre-assessment, my students scored a 38% average overall, and on the post-assessment, they scored a 67% average. While this is not a passing average, it is growth, and I am so incredibly proud of them because I know that this was a little bit of a challenging concept, and I'm just very happy with their work and how much they grew, considering how many low students we do have in the class. This is my subgroup comparison. I chose the subgroups of girls and boys because I had an even amount of both. For my pre-assessment, the girls had an average of 31%, and they ended on the post-assessment with an average of 64%. The boys had a pre-assessment average of 45% and a post-assessment average of 70%. This is my graph that shows the individual student comparison. Student 1 scored a 25% on the pre-assessment and then a 100% on the post-assessment. And student 2 scored a 38% on the pre-assessment and then an 88% on the post-assessment. This is my graph that shows the whole class by 2 objectives. So for objective 1, the pre-assessment, they scored an average of 41%, and then at the post-assessment for objective 1, they scored a 66%. For objective 2, their pre-assessment average was a 36%, and at the post-assessment for objective 2, it was a 69% average. So my instructional decision making, on the first day, I showed the class a video to introduce them to verbs, and I noticed that with our second class, which is the class I did this Ttws over, that they were very wiggly and full of lots of energy. So I decided that it would be best to show them another video that I had come across when searching for a video to use in the lesson, it taught them about verbs and it had them dancing, and so they thought it was silly at first, but they engaged with it, and they danced, and they had fun, and they enjoyed it. On day 4 of teaching the work sample, my plan was to have students come up to the anchor chart and create future tense sentences. And after doing this with the first class, which was our switch class, that I noticed that the activity took up way too much time, and that I was rushing through the other activities, and it was just not a good situation, and my students were also just not taking the activity very seriously and were just creating very silly sentences, as you would expect second graders to do. So when our homeroom class, which was the TTWS class, when they came in, I decided that I would write the sentences myself, and that they would identify the verbs through my sentences, and that we would discuss why they were future tense and what it might look like as a past or present tense sentence. On day 5 of teaching the work sample, I began to have the students identify nouns to connect with previous learning, as well as the verbs, and I learned that this was not the best idea for these students. I ended up confusing them more than I did help them, and they scored lower on the post-assessment from what I could tell when I was checking through their post-assessments. And so I decided before I taught the next class and gave them their post-assessment that it would be best that I not bring up nouns at all. And it was successful. They scored higher on the post-test than the other class did. And another thing that I did for making decisions, whenever I group students, I decided that I would do them in mixed ability groups, Usually my mentor teacher and I just group them randomly through Class Dojo, but I thought that for this new concept that it would be best for them to be put into mixed ability groups with the amount of low level students that we have. And I think that this was successful and it helped the students because I heard them teaching one another and helping and asking questions, and it was great to hear. And I think that it was a great benefit for those little low babies. My most successful objective was Objective 2 because my students showed an average of 36% during the pre-assessment and ended with a 69% overall, which was more growth than in my other objective. I think this one was most successful because my students had to learn what a verb was, and this was a fairly simple concept once they got the hang of it. We also had to learn about verb tense with the other objective, and to know tense, you have to know verbs, and I think that my students understood verbs for the most part really well. Some of them still struggled, definitely, but I think that that is why this one was the most successful. Objective 1 was my least successful objective. My students went from an average of 41% overall to 66%. And I noticed that during the pre-test they had scored higher initially, but on the post-test they scored lower. And I believe that this objective was just more challenging for the students because I noticed that my low students had a hard time grasping the concept of tense. It was difficult for them to understand why we need to change the ending or change the sentence a little bit based on what happened or when it happened. I also believe that my pacing of lessons had an impact on their learning. I had a problem with pacing during this week. I didn't realize how long some of my activities would take, and so I sometimes had to rush through some things like some independent work or group work that I think they may have benefited from. So I think that if I could go back, I would definitely change this. And so, despite my efforts, my students did not reach a passing average. They went from a 38% to a 67%, which I think is great growth for them. I think that this happened mostly because my students are so low. Almost half of my students are below level. I think that this is also due to the gap that they had with virtual learning through just going through COVID, and even some of them were virtual before coming to us this semester. So I think that this all had an impact in their learning, and we have seen it not only in our class, but with other second grade classes, and I'm sure with other grades as well. I also think that something that may have impacted my score is that I had one student who did not show growth. He went from a 50% on the pre-assessment to a 38% on the post. I think that this is because he was guessing, because he's one of our very low babies. And I also had 4 new students join our class, 2 of which are very low. And I think them being thrown into this new environment may have affected their learning. But overall, I'm really satisfied with how they all performed, and I know that they are just amazing kiddos, and they are going to learn and grow and do amazing, amazing things in the future. And here are my professional development goals. One of them is to fix my struggle with timing, or grow with it. It has been an issue, especially at the beginning, but I have been growing and I'm getting better. Another goal of mine is to spend more time relaying my expectations to students. I felt like a little bit like my students walked out on me a little bit when I began teaching because I didn't really relay my expectations to them, and so I did do that eventually, and they began to listen to me and respect me, and I look forward to learning more in the future on my own. Another goal for me is to work on managing behavior and responding to it. I sometimes just had a hard time doing that, and I know that just through watching other teachers and even reading more articles, I could help myself. Thank you so much for watching my video.